My name is Sarah. For 10 long years, the world knew me by many titles: a wife, a neighbor, a shadow in the background of someone else's success. But most often, they called me just a housewife. Before we dive into a journey of transformation that changed everything, I want to take a moment to look you in the eye and say, thank you. Thank you for being here, for giving me your time, and for allowing these stories into your heart. It is a true honor to share this path with you. If this story speaks to the strength you carry inside, or if it reminds you that your silence is never weakness, but preparation, I humbly invite you to subscribe to Queen's Revenge. Here, we don't just tell stories, we build a community of empowerment where no one is ever just anything. And to those of you who have already subscribed and walked this path with me, my heart is full. I pray that your lives be touched by an abundance of wealth, that your homes overflow with unending happiness, and that every seed of kindness you sow returns to you 1,000-fold. Now, let us begin. Because sometimes, the person the world overlooks is the one who is already busy redesigning it. The air in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, vintage Chardonnay, and the suffocating musk of revived teenage insecurities. It was our 10-year high school reunion, a curated arena where the ghosts of our past selves came to wrestle with the polished veneers of our present. I stood near the periphery, my fingers tracing the cold rim of a crystal flute I hadn't sipped from in 20 minutes. I was wearing a simple black dress. It was silk, perfectly tailored, but devoid of the sequins or loud brand logos that screamed for attention. My hair was pulled back into a low, sensible bun. To anyone looking, I was the picture of suburban grace, the supportive background character in the blockbuster movie that was my husband's life. I had mastered the art of the half-smile, the kind that suggested I was listening intently while my mind was actually navigating the intricate architecture of a global supply chain. Michael Roberts, my husband, was 20 feet away, the undisputed son of his own solar system. He moved with a practiced, oily charisma, his hand perpetually landing on a shoulder or gesturing with a glass of scotch. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who believed that power was measured by the volume of one's voice and the cost of one's watch. Michael. Man, you haven't changed a bit, boomed Greg Miller, a former varsity quarterback who had traded his jersey for a slightly too tight corporate suit. I saw the Forbes piece on Roberts Global. Top-tier stuff, brother. You're really running the world. Michael let out a robust, performative laugh, the kind that was meant to be heard across the room. Trying, Greg. You know how it is. The grind never stops. You have to be aggressive, or your lunch. And Sarah? Greg turned his gaze toward me, his eyes flickering with a mix of vague recognition and polite boredom. What about the woman behind the man? What have you been up to all these years, Sarah? Last I heard, you were heading to MIT on a full ride for computational mathematics. Did you end up at NASA or something? I opened my mouth to speak, to perhaps mention the proprietary algorithms I had spent the last decade perfecting in the quiet hours between 2 a.m. and sunrise. I wanted to tell him about the venture capital funds I had quietly steered toward disruptive green energy. But before a single syllable could escape my lips, Michael's hand found the small of my back, not in a gesture of affection, but in a maneuver of possession. He laughed again, a sound that felt like sandpaper against my skin. Oh, Sarah. He looked at Greg, then at the circle of old classmates who had gathered to bask in his reflected glory. He shook his head with a patronizing fondness that made my stomach churn. Sarah? Oh, she's just a housewife. The words hung in the air like a sudden, foul odor. For a heartbeat, there was a heavy silence. Then, the laughter followed. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it was worse. It was condescending. It was the kind of laughter people use for a cute puppy that tried to jump on a high couch and failed. Well, nothing wrong with that, Greg said, his voice dripping with a pity that felt like a physical weight. It's a noble calling. Keeping the home fires burning while the big guy here slays the dragons. A woman named Claire, who was draped in enough diamonds to fund a small village, patted my arm. I envy you, honestly. No stress, no deadlines. Just the kids and the garden. Must be so peaceful. I felt the heat rising in my neck, but I didn't let my expression falter. I kept the half-smile pinned to my face, even as I felt the tectonic plates of my marriage finally, irrevocably shift. For 10 years, I had played this role. I had been his sounding board, his editor, his silent partner. I had watched him take credit for ideas I whispered to him over dinner. I had allowed him to believe that my hobby on the computer was just a way to pass the time while the laundry dried. I had shrunk myself so he could feel giant. And in 6 words, he had reduced my entire existence to a domestic utility. My clutch bag, tucked under my arm, vibrated. It was a rhythmic, insistent hum. I stepped back, away from the circle of successful men and their supportive wives. "Excuse me," I murmured, my voice as soft as the silk of my dress. "I think I need to check on the caterers." Michael didn't even look at me. He was already launching into a story about a hostile takeover he'd supposedly masterminded, a takeover that I had actually mapped out for him on a napkin 3 months ago while he was panicking over his whiskey. I walked toward the dim hallway near the restrooms, the sound of the ballroom fading into a muffled cacophony. I pulled my phone from my bag. The screen was a bright, cold blue in the shadows of the hallway. From Elena, Quantum Horizon, subject, Project Odyssey time, 9:42 p.m. Sarah, the ink is dry. The European Tech Consortium has officially signed. We now own 60% of their infrastructure. The press release is scheduled for 8 a.m. Monday. You are now the majority stakeholder of the largest AI network in the EMEA region. Congratulations, boss. I leaned my head against the cool wallpaper, closing my eyes. While my husband was out there telling the world I was just a housewife, I had just completed an acquisition worth $4.2 billion. While he was bragging about a firm that was secretly drowning in debt, I had just become the most powerful woman in the tech industry, anonymously. A tear pricked the corner of my eye, not of sadness, but of a strange, morning relief. The woman who loved Michael Roberts, the woman who was willing to hide her light so he wouldn't feel shadowed, had died in that ballroom 10 minutes ago. I thought about the perfect home we shared. I thought about the way he spoke to me when the doors were closed, the subtle, "Honey, leave the business talk to me," or the, "Did you remember to pick up my dry cleaning?" I realized then that Michael didn't just underestimate me, he needed to believe I was small so that he could feel relevant. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. My eyes looked different. The softness was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating clarity of a woman who had seen the end of a long, dark road. The acquisition of the European firm wasn't just a business move. It was the first domino in a sequence that would dismantle Michael's world. He didn't know that Roberts Global was currently being kept afloat by a series of shell companies, companies that I owned. He didn't know that the merger he was desperately trying to meet, a mysterious CEO for, was a meeting with me. I tucked the phone back into my clutch. I straightened my simple black dress. I smoothed the hair of my sensible bun. I walked back into the ballroom. The music was louder now, a frantic jazz beat that felt like a countdown. Michael was still there, his arm draped around Greg's shoulder, his cocky smile wide and blinding. He saw me approaching and beckoned me over with a flick of his fingers, like he was calling a servant. "There she is," Michael announced to the group. "Sarah, Greg was just saying we should all go to the Hamptons this summer. You'd like that, wouldn't you? You can work on your tan while we talk shop." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't see a partner. I saw a target. "The Hamptons sounds lovely, Michael," I said, my voice as clear as a bell. "But I think your schedule might be a bit complicated by then." He chuckled, squeezing my shoulder. "Always worrying about my schedule. See, guys? A perfect housewife. Keeps me organized." I smiled. It wasn't the half-smile anymore. It was the smile of a predator watching a man walk into a trap he had spent 10 years building for himself. "I'm going to head home early, Michael," I said softly. "I have some domestic duties to attend to." Sure, Sure. Take the Tesla. I'll catch an Uber later with the boys, he said, already turning back to his audience. As I walked out of the St. Regis, the cool night air hit my face, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The housewife was leaving the building. The CEO was going to work. Michael's cocky smile was still etched in my mind, but I knew the truth. Tomorrow, that smile would vanish. And it would all start with the divorce papers I had already drafted and stored in a secure cloud server, right next to the files that would bankrupt his company. Revenge, I realized, wasn't a loud explosion. It was the silent, steady hum of a phone in a black silk clutch. The sun rose over the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge with a deceptive, golden tranquility. At 6:30 a.m., the neighborhood was a symphony of sprinklers and the distant chime of security systems being disarmed. To any observer, I was merely another silhouette in a kitchen window, a woman tied to the rhythm of the percolator and the school calendar. I stood at the marble island, my hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a machine. Bread in the toaster. 2 apples sliced into perfect, uniform crescents. Peanut butter smoothed over whole wheat. My movements were rhythmic, almost meditative, providing the perfect cover for the lightning-fast calculations running through my mind. Michael's words from the night before, "She's just a housewife," echoed in the clink of the silverware, but they no longer stung. They had become a frequency I had learned to tune out, a background static that allowed me to operate in total, blissful invisibility. Michael stumbled into the kitchen at 7:15, smelling of expensive scotch and the lingering arrogance of the reunion. He didn't look at me, not really. He looked at the coffee pot. He looked at his reflection in the stainless steel toaster. He looked at the world as if it were a stage built specifically for his performance. "Great night, wasn't it?" he muttered, rubbing his temples. Greg and the guys were impressed. "Roberts Global is on the map, Sarah. We're looking at a record-breaking quarter, assuming this merger goes through." "I'm sure you'll handle it brilliantly, Michael," I said, my voice a soft, compliant melody. I handed him his mug, black, 2 sugars, exactly how he liked it. I was the curator of his comfort, the invisible architect of his daily ease. "You're a lifesaver," he said, patting my hand absent-mindedly as if I were a particularly reliable appliance. "By the way, I have a late dinner tonight. Don't wait up. And could you drop my blue suit at the cleaners? I need it for the meeting with the European reps on Thursday." "Of course," I replied. I watched him leave, his gait heavy with the self-importance of a man who believed he carried the weight of the world, unaware that I was the one holding the floor beneath his feet. As soon as the garage door hummed shut and the house fell into its morning silence, the housewife retreated. I didn't go to the laundry room. I didn't reach for the vacuum. Instead, I walked to the back of the walk-in pantry, behind the stacks of artisanal flour and the organized rows of canned organic broth. I pressed my thumb against a small, recessed plate hidden behind a spice rack. With a soft, pneumatic hiss, the false wall slid back, revealing a stark, soundproofed corridor that led to what I called the command center. The transition was instantaneous. The scent of cinnamon and lavender was replaced by the ozone-sharp tang of high-end cooling fans and the sterile scent of leather. I stepped into the room and the lights hummed to life, triggered by the biometric sensors in my watch. 3 massive, curved 8K monitors dominated the far wall, their glow casting a cool, blue light across my face. On the left screen, the London Stock Exchange flickered in real time, a waterfall of green and red data. On the right, deep-layer sentiment analysis of global tech markets pulsed like a digital heartbeat. And in the center, the logo of Quantum Horizon Technologies, a minimalist, silver arc, sat atop a command terminal that held the keys to a kingdom Michael couldn't even imagine. I sat in the ergonomic chair, feeling the familiar surge of power that came from being the smartest person in any room, even if no one knew I was in it. I looked at the screens and felt the weight of the last 10 years. Michael thought I was napping during those long afternoons when the kids were toddlers. In reality, I was propped up in bed with a laptop hidden under a nursing pillow, writing the foundational code for an AI-driven predictive market engine. He thought my long grocery trips were due to my inability to find the right organic kale. In truth, I was sitting in the parking lot in the back of the SUV, on encrypted conference calls with venture capitalists in Singapore and Zurich, closing seed rounds worth millions. Every hobby he patronized was a brick in my fortress. Every time he told me to leave the math to the professionals, I used the anger to sharpen my algorithms. I had built an empire in the stolen moments between laundry loads and parent-teacher conferences. I had become a ghost in the machine, a silent sovereign of the digital age. "Elena," I said aloud. "I'm here, Sarah," my COO's voice crackled through the hidden speakers, crisp and professional. "The market opened 5 minutes ago. Roberts Global is showing a 0.8% dip. The rumors of their debt-to-equity ratio are starting to circulate in the private forums." "Good," I said, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard, the click sounding like a firing squad. "Michael is banking on the European merger to save him. He thinks he's meeting a representative from an anonymous Swiss conglomerate. He doesn't realize that conglomerate is a subsidiary of Quantum Horizon." I pulled up a private file labeled. It was a comprehensive map of Michael's professional life. Every loan he'd taken, every corner he'd cut, every employee he'd mistreated. It was all there. I wasn't just his wife, I was his auditor, his judge, and very soon, his executioner. "He asked me to take his suit to the cleaners today," I whispered, a stray smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Are you going to?" Elena asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I am," I replied. "And while I'm at it, I'm going to authorize the short sell on his primary logistics partner. By the time he puts that suit on Thursday morning, the company he's trying to save will be worth 30% less than it is right now." I leaned back, watching the data flow. It was a strange, haunting duality. Upstairs, there were half-eaten sandwiches and a grocery list on the fridge. Down here, there was the power to move markets and topple giants. For a decade, I had lived in the shadows of his ego, content to let him believe he was the sun. But the sun doesn't realize that it is the darkness of space that defines its light. I had learned to love the dark. I had learned that the most dangerous person in the world isn't the one who shouts their success from the rooftops, it's the one who quietly listens from the kitchen window. I pulled up the latest financial report for Roberts Global. The numbers were bleeding. Michael was desperate, though he was too arrogant to admit it to himself. He needed a savior. He needed a miracle. I closed my eyes for a moment, thinking of the way he had laughed at the reunion. The way he had looked at me with that mixture of boredom and pity. He had divorced me in his mind long ago, he just hadn't found a better version of the life he thought I provided. He wanted a trophy, not a partner. He wanted a mirror to reflect his own greatness, not a woman who could overshadow it. "Initiate phase 2, Elena," I said, my voice cold and certain. "Send the revised merger terms to his legal team. Make them aggressive. Make them impossible. Let's see how much he's willing to sell of his soul to keep his housewife in this neighborhood." "Copy that, boss." It's a beautiful morning for a takeover. I stayed in the command center for 3 hours, moving pieces across a global chessboard with surgical precision. I was no longer Sarah, the woman who forgot to buy 2% milk. I was the architect. I was the storm. As I prepared to leave the room, my gaze fell on a small, framed drawing tucked away on the corner of the desk. It was a picture my daughter had drawn when she was 6. It showed a woman wearing a cape, holding a laptop in one hand and a shield in the other. Underneath, in messy purple crayon, it said, "My mom saves the world." A lump formed in my throat. My children knew. In their own way, they had seen the truth that their father was too blind to recognize. They saw the strength in the silence. I pressed my thumb to the sensor, the wall slid shut, and I stepped back into the pantry. I walked into the kitchen, picked up the car keys, and grabbed Michael's blue suit from the hall closet. I had a busy morning. I had to go to the dry cleaners, buy the milk, and systematically destroy the man who thought I was nothing. The ambience at Lumiere Bistro was an exquisite tapestry of upper-middle-class serenity. Sun-drenched windows cast long, golden rectangles across white linen tablecloths, and the air was a delicate infusion of freshly baked brioche, expensive citrus candles, and the effervescent pop of chilled Prosecco. Across from me sat Maya and Chloe, my two closest friends from the neighborhood, women whose lives were built on the same foundations of school fundraisers and tennis lessons that I had spent a decade mimicking. Honestly, Sarah, Chloe said, leaning in with a conspiratorial whisper, her eyes wide with a mix of fascination and dread. I don't know how you do it. Michael's schedule is insane. Don't you ever feel left behind? Like you're just the lighthouse keeping the shore safe while he's out discovering new continents? Maya nodded, her hand reaching across the table to pat mine. Her touch was well-intentioned, but it carried that familiar, heavy residue of pity. We just want you to be happy. You were so brilliant in college. Sometimes I look at you and wonder if you ever missed the girl who wanted to conquer the world. I offered them a soft, practiced smile, the one that reached my eyes but never quite warmed them. I'm exactly where I need to be, I said. And it was the truth. I was exactly where I needed to be to watch the house of cards collapse. Just as Maya was about to launch into a supportive monologue about finding oneself through Pilates, my phone began to vibrate on the table. The caller ID flashed, Michael. The vibration felt different this time, sharper, more definitive. I felt a sudden, electric stillness settle over my heart. I excused myself with a polite nod and stepped toward the bistro's outdoor terrace, where the scent of blooming jasmine fought against the city's exhaust. Michael? I said, my voice steady. Sarah. His voice was a shard of ice, devoid of the performative warmth he used in public. There was a new edge to it, a jagged, reckless arrogance that told me he had finally convinced himself of his own myth. I'm not coming home tonight. Or any night this week. I looked out at the street, watching a gardener meticulously prune a hedge. Is everything all right at the office? The office is fine. Better than fine. I'm on the verge of the biggest deal of my life, Sarah. I'm moving into a stratosphere you can't even fathom. He paused, and I could almost hear him adjusting his silk tie in a mirror, basking in the glow of his perceived evolution. I've been thinking about the reunion. About us. About the image I need to project to the board and my future partners. And what image is that, Michael? An image of power, he snapped. A man in my position needs a partner who is an asset, not an anchor. I need a woman whose presence commands a room, whose name carries weight in the industry, who understands the stakes of the global market. I don't need someone who spends her life folding laundry and worrying about the color of the guest towels. I gripped the wrought iron railing, my knuckles turning white. Not out of pain, but out of the sheer, crystalline absurdity of the moment. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm divorcing you, Sarah. My lawyer will be at the house tomorrow to oversee the inventory. I've already moved my things into the penthouse near the office. Don't make this difficult. You've had a comfortable 10 years on my dime, let's not pretend you contributed anything more than domestic upkeep. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of a decade of secrets. I thought about the billions of dollars currently flowing through my accounts. I thought about the algorithms that were at that very moment dismantling his logistics chain. I thought about the domestic upkeep that had kept his company from bankruptcy 3 times without him ever knowing the source of the anonymous infusions. I need a woman who matches my status, Michael added, his voice dripping with a final, toxic condescension. Go back to your brunch, Sarah. Enjoy your mimosas. It's likely the last time you'll be able to afford them at a place like this. The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door swinging wide. It was the sound of a debt being settled in full. I walked back to the table. Maya and Chloe were staring at me, their faces etched with concern. They had seen the color drain from my face through the glass. Sarah? What happened? Maya asked, her voice trembling. I sat down and took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I felt a strange, humming clarity vibrating in my bones. Michael just called, I said, my voice eerily calm. He's divorcing me. Apparently, I don't match his status. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, Sarah. I'm so sorry. That arrogant, ungrateful pig. After everything you've done for him. Maya moved her chair closer, ready to envelop me in a shroud of suburban grief. We'll help you find a lawyer. We'll find you a small place. You can start over. It'll be hard, but... I looked at them, and for the first time in 10 years, I let the housewife mask slip just a fraction. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I simply smiled, a slow, sharp, predatory smile that made Maya stop mid-sentence. If that's what he wants, I said softly, then that is exactly what he will get. I reached into my bag and pulled out my second phone, the encrypted one that never left my person. I didn't care that they were watching. The time for hiding was over. I dialed the number I knew by heart. It was answered on the first ring. Elena, I said. My voice had shifted. The softness was gone, replaced by the cold, metallic resonance of a commander on a battlefield. I'm here, Sarah. What's the status? The status is free, I replied. I looked at Maya and Chloe, whose expressions had shifted from pity to utter bewilderment. They looked like they were seeing a stranger inhabit my skin. It's time, Elena. Initiate the Roberts Global Maneuver. I want every credit line we control frozen by sunset. I want the short sell orders on their tech stock triggered at the opening bell. And that merger proposal Michael is so excited about? Yes? Elena's voice was sharp with anticipation. Send the formal rejection from the mysterious CEO. But don't just say no. Tell them the reason for the rejection is fundamental leadership incompetence and catastrophic lack of vision. Attach the internal audit we did on his offshore holdings. Consider it done. Anything else? I looked at the sun glinting off the crystal on the table. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. Yes, I said. Book the penthouse at the Vanguard. The one overlooking Michael's new office. I want to be able to see the lights go out in his building from my balcony. I hung up and placed the phone back in my bag. The silence at the table was absolute. Maya and Chloe were staring at me as if I had suddenly sprouted wings made of fire. Sarah? Chloe whispered. Who was that? What was that? I picked up my glass of Prosecco and raised it in a silent toast to the empty chair across the street where my old life used to live. That, I said, my voice smooth as silk, was the sound of the housewife going on strike. Now, shall we order dessert? I find I have a sudden, massive appetite. I felt the phantom weight of Michael's blue suit, the one I was supposed to take to the cleaners, lift from my shoulders. He wanted a woman who matched his status. He had no idea that he was about to spend the rest of his life trying to reach mine. The Roberts Global Maneuver had begun. By tomorrow morning, the world would know that the storm hadn't just arrived, it had been living in Michael Roberts' house for 10 years, making him breakfast every single morning. The silence of my suburban home had never felt so profound. It wasn't the empty, aching silence of a woman abandoned, it was the pressurized, electric stillness of a cockpit before takeoff. I sat in the command center, the only light in the room emanating from the trio of monitors that reflected in my eyes like digital constellations. On the kitchen counter upstairs, the divorce papers Michael's lawyer had graciously delivered sat next to a half-empty fruit bowl. He had even included a sticky note, "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Sarah. Just sign." I didn't sign. Not yet. I had a much more important document to finalize. Elena, pull up the Roberts Global Internal Burn Rate, I commanded, my voice cutting through the hum of the cooling fans. Loading now, Sarah. It's worse than the public realizes. The Lumina acquisition in Singapore has become a black hole. Michael over-leveraged their core assets to buy a manufacturing plant that hasn't produced a single circuit board in 6 months. They are hemorrhaging $12 million a week. At this rate, Roberts Global is a corpse in a three-piece suit. I leaned back, watching the red bars on the graph climb like a fever. Michael's arrogance had finally outpaced his intellect. He had ignored the warning signs, the market shifts, and the subtle advice I'd planted in his industry journals for months. He was drowning, and like any drowning man, he was looking for a hand to pull him out, no matter whose hand it was. He was obsessed with the ghost of the valley, the anonymous CEO of Quantum Horizon. In the mahogany-paneled circles where Michael traded favors and lies, my company was whispered about as a mythic savior. We were the mysterious tech giant, with a cash reserve larger than most sovereign nations. Michael believed that a merger with us wouldn't just save his company, it would validate his ego on a global stage. He thought he was hunting a partner. He didn't realize he was being lured into a labyrinth. "It's time to send the Phoenix Protocol," I whispered. The proposal I had drafted wasn't just a business contract, it was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. I had spent weeks crafting its language, using a specific tone of professional coldness that Michael would mistake for elite sophistication. The bait was irresistible, a $5 billion capital infusion, total debt restructuring, and a seat on the Global Innovation Board. To Michael, reading this would feel like winning the lottery while standing on the gallows. He would see the numbers and his pupils would dilate with greed. He would see the prestige and his chest would puff with the pride of a man who thought he had finally arrived. But beneath the glittering surface lay the poison pills. They were buried in the dense, technical jargon of Clause 12.4, Intellectual Property Sequestration, and Clause 22.9, the Leadership Integrity Audit. To a standard corporate lawyer, they looked like boilerplate protective measures for a high-value merger. But to a genius, to someone who knew the architecture of Michael's lies, they were thermal detonators. Clause 12.4 stated that in the event of any undisclosed financial discrepancy, exceeding 0.05%, the entirety of Roberts Global's patents would automatically transfer to Quantum Horizon for the price of $1. Clause 22.9 was the kill switch. It demanded a deep trace forensic audit of the CEO's private holdings to ensure no conflicts of interest. Michael had been skimming from his company's pension fund to pay for his offshore accounts and his new penthouse. He would think he could hide it. He would think he was smarter than the auditors. He was wrong. Elena, route the proposal through the Zurich-based encrypted server. Use the Sovereign Alpha signature. Make sure it arrives in his inbox at precisely 2 a.m. I want him to find it when he's at his most vulnerable, exhausted, caffeinated, and desperate for a miracle. Encryption set. Routing through the Swiss nodes now, Elena confirmed. Sarah, once he signs the letter of intent, there's no going back. He'll be legally bound to provide the audit access. That's the point, Elena. He wants a woman who matches his status. I'm going to show him exactly what my status is. I'm going to show him that while he was playing checkers at reunions, I was building the board he's standing on. I watched the sending progress bar. 10%. 45%. 82%. I thought back to the early years of our marriage. I remembered the nights I sat up helping him write his first business plans while he slept, exhausted from networking. I remembered the times I had corrected his spreadsheets under the guise of checking for typos. I had been his silent engine for a decade, fueling a car that he thought ran on his own brilliance. Now, I was removing the engine. Sent. The screen flickered back to the market data. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. I stood up and walked out of the command center, the wall sliding shut behind me with a whisper. I walked into the kitchen and looked at the divorce papers again. Michael's arrogance was so profound that he hadn't even asked for a mediator. He truly believed that I, just a housewife, would be too intimidated or too stupid to fight for anything. He thought he was letting me down easy by leaving me the house, a house he didn't realize I had already paid off 3 years ago using a secret trust. I picked up a pen. I didn't sign the divorce papers. Instead, I wrote a single sentence on the back of the last page. Status is earned, Michael, not assigned. I left the papers on the counter and went upstairs to my bedroom. For the first time in 10 years, I slept without the weight of his expectations pressing down on my chest. I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a general who knows the battle is already won, even if the enemy hasn't heard the first shot. Across town, in a cold, glass penthouse, I knew Michael's phone would chime. He would sit up in bed, his eyes bleary, and see the notification from an unknown, encrypted sender. He would see the name Quantum Horizon. He would see the $5 billion figure. And he would smile. That cocky, insufferable, predatory smile. He would think he had been saved. He would think the universe had recognized his greatness just in time. He would have no idea that the miracle in his inbox was actually a mirror, one that was about to show him exactly how small he truly was. Every empire, no matter how imposing its marble columns or how vast its treasury, has a fracture point. It is rarely a flaw in the stone, more often, it is a tremor in the heart of the people who hold it up. As I sat in the obsidian glow of my command center, my eyes weren't on the flickering stock tickers or the global news cycles. They were fixed on a single, high-resolution portrait of a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the previous decade. David Chin, Chief Technology Officer of Roberts Global. To the industry, David was the silent engine, the wizard behind the curtain. To Michael, David was simply a high-functioning tool, an expensive piece of software in a human suit that was expected to perform on command. But as I dissected David's digital footprint, I didn't see a tool. I saw a soul that was being systematically hollowed out. His recent divorce had been a public and financial massacre. His bank accounts were hemorrhaging to pay for a legal battle he was losing, and his creative spark, the brilliant, erratic fire that had once birthed revolutionary code, was being smothered by Michael's relentless demand for marketable shortcuts. David was a poet being forced to write instruction manuals for a man who couldn't read. "He's the one, Elena," I whispered, my voice thick with a strange, somber empathy. "He is the architect of everything Michael claims to have built. And he is breaking. Our data shows he's reached his limit, Sarah," Elena replied. "He's been logged into the Roberts Global server for 72 hours straight. He's trying to patch the holes in the Singapore acquisition, but the code is failing because the foundation is rotten. Michael is currently at a gala in the city, taking credit for a technological breakthrough that David hasn't even finished yet." I looked at David's face on the screen. There was a profound, weary melancholy in his eyes that mirrored the woman I had been only months ago. We were both ghosts haunting Michael's success. The difference was, I had already learned how to become the hunter. "We don't buy him, Elena. You can't buy a man who has lost his faith in the mission. You have to rescue him." I began the infiltration, not with a sledgehammer, but with a whisper. I didn't reach out as Sarah, or even as the CEO of Quantum Horizon. I created a phantom, a boutique, ultra-exclusive executive search firm called Alethea Systems. The name was a nod to the Greek word for truth or unconcealedness. I sent the first seed through a secure, encrypted developer forum David frequented in the dead of night, the only place where he felt like a person instead of an asset. It wasn't a job offer. It was a critique of his most recent, unfinished algorithm. "The recursive loop in your third module is beautiful, David. But it's being suffocated by the legacy architecture it's forced to sit on. You're trying to build a cathedral on a swamp. You deserve a foundation made of light." I watched the server logs. 3 minutes later, David responded. "Who is this?" I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work. Over the next 48 hours, I planted more seeds. I sent him snippets of code from Quantum Horizon, mathematical poetry that solved the very problems he was currently drowning in. I showed him a world where technology was an art form, not a weapon of corporate greed. I gave him a glimpse of a ghost position at Alethea, a role that didn't exist in the physical world, but offered a salary that would end his financial nightmares and a creative freedom he had long since forgotten. I was offering him his life back. All he had to do was tell me the truth about Michael's. By the third night, David was hooked. He believed he was communicating with a visionary think tank that saw his true worth, the worth Michael had spent years trampling. I can't leave yet, David typed, his digital voice heavy with a misguided sense of loyalty that made my heart ache. I have to see this merger through. Michael says it's our only hope. If I leave now, thousands of employees lose their jobs. I leaned into the microphone, my words measured and sharp. Elena, send him the deep trace file on the Singapore factory. Let him see what Michael did with the pension funds. Sent, Elena confirmed. I watched the data on my screen as David opened the file. I could almost feel the physical shock radiating through the fiber optic cables. He was seeing the truth. Michael hadn't just been aggressive, he had been criminal. He had gambled the future of his employees to fund his own vanity. The loyalty David felt was being used as a shield for a monster. He lied to me, David finally typed. The text was small, fragile, and utterly broken. He lies to everyone, David, I replied through the Alethea persona. Including the woman who wakes up next to him every morning. You aren't his partner. You are his scapegoat. When this merger fails, and it will, he will blame the technical glitches. He will blame you. A long silence followed. Then, the fracture finally happened. What do you want from me? David asked. Nothing you haven't already noticed, I typed back. Just a window. Keep your position. Be the CTO Michael expects you to be. But every time Michael makes a move, every time he adjusts a figure or hides a debt, you tell us. You aren't a spy, David. You are a witness. And when the walls come down, Alethea will be there to pull you from the rubble. I closed the terminal. The trap within the trap was set. Michael thought David was his most loyal soldier, the man who would fix the messy parts of his life. He had no idea that his most trusted ally was now a silent observer for the woman he had dismissed as just a housewife. I walked out of the command center and into the kitchen. The morning light was just beginning to touch the counters. I saw Michael's blue suit, the one I had graciously picked up from the cleaners, hanging on the door. I touched the fabric, feeling the cold, expensive wool. Tomorrow, Michael would wear this suit to a meeting where he would lie to his board about his company's stability. He would stand there with his cocky smile, confident that his genius CTO had fixed the cracks. He didn't know that the cracks were now ears. I felt a pang of sadness for David, and even for the woman I used to be, the people who had poured their lives into Michael's void, hoping for a crumb of recognition. But as I watched the sun rise over the suburban horizon, the sadness turned into a cold, steel resolve. I wasn't just taking Michael's company. I was reclaiming the people he had stolen from themselves. The weakest link had been found. And it wasn't David's spirit that was weak, it was Michael's assumption that he could break a man forever and expect him to stay silent. The command center was silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the cooling towers and the occasional soft chime of an incoming data stream. I sat in the center of the blue glow, my eyes fixed on the middle monitor. Thanks to a discreet backdoor David Chin had left open in the building's security sublayer, I wasn't just a spectator, I was a ghost haunting the very heart of Roberts Global. The boardroom was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. A massive slab of polished mahogany stretched across the room, reflecting the cold, gray skyline of the city outside. Around it sat the board of directors, men and women whose net worth could shift the tides of nations, all of them wearing expressions of guarded expectation. And there, at the head of the table, was Michael. He looked impeccable in the blue suit I had picked up from the cleaners. He had spent 10 minutes in front of our hallway mirror that morning, adjusting his silk tie with a smirk that suggested he had already conquered the world. Seeing him now through the high-definition lens of the security camera, that smirk was in full bloom. He leaned back in his leather chair, a glass of sparkling water in front of him, radiating the kind of unearned confidence that had once captivated me and now only made my skin crawl. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael began, his voice projecting through the room's hidden speakers with a rich, practiced resonance. We are at the threshold of a new era for Roberts Global. While the rumors of our liquidity issues have been greatly exaggerated by the gutter press, I can confirm today that we have successfully engaged the interest of a premier global entity. He paused for effect, letting the weight of the moment settle. On my screen, I saw David Chin sitting at the far end of the table. He looked small, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting toward the tablet in front of him. He knew. Quantum Horizon Technologies, Michael continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial silkiness. The ghost of the valley itself. They've presented a merger proposal that will not only stabilize our current holdings but will catapult our valuation into the 11-figure range. I have been in direct, high-level negotiations with their leadership. They recognize that Roberts Global is the only firm with the infrastructure to match their vision. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I have them exactly where I want them. They are hungry for our patents. They are desperate for our market share in Asia. By the end of this week, I will be signing a deal that makes every other tech acquisition this decade look like a lemonade stand. I watched him spin the web. It was a beautiful lie, woven with the threads of his own delusion. He spoke of negotiations that had never happened. He spoke of recognition that was actually a predatory observation. He was selling his board a dream to hide the nightmare of his own making. I looked at the clock on my terminal. 10:14 a.m. Elena, I whispered. Is the payload ready? The surgical strike is live, Sarah. We're synced to his personal device and the boardroom's central display. Say the word. I took a slow breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. I thought of the 10 years I had spent as his anchor. I thought of the way he had dismissed me at the reunion, a casual discard after a decade of loyalty. I thought of the way he had talked about matching his status. Send it, I said. On the monitor, I saw Michael's personal tablet chime. A notification flashed on the screen, mirrored instantly onto the 60-inch display behind him for the entire board to see. From the Office of the CEO, Quantum Horizon subject, formal termination of merger discussions. The room went deathly silent. Michael's sentence died in his throat. He frowned, his hand reaching out to tap the tablet. It seems we have a live update from our partners, he said, his voice fluttering for the briefest of seconds before he regained his bravado. Let's see the final confirmation. He clicked the file. The document that appeared on the screen wasn't a contract. It was an autopsy. I had designed the display to be undeniable. It wasn't just a no. It was a page-by-page breakdown of Roberts Global's hidden failures. The screen displayed the secret debt cycles Michael had used to hide the losses from the Singapore acquisition. It showed the exact percentage of the pension fund he had diverted to maintain his offshore lifestyle. It highlighted the poison pills I had planted in the initial proposal, pills he had been too arrogant to even notice. The most brutal part was the final paragraph, highlighted in a cold, electric blue. Quantum Horizon Technologies does not partner with sinking ships or the captains who sabotage them. Due to the catastrophic leadership failures and systemic financial deception uncovered in our audit, all merger discussions are hereby terminated. Furthermore, as of 9 a.m. this morning, Quantum Horizon has acquired 40% of Roberts Global's outstanding debt from the International Banking Consortium. We are no longer your potential partner, Michael. We are now your primary creditor. I watched Michael's face. It was a transformation I would remember for the rest of my life. The cocky smile didn't just fade, it disintegrated. The color drained from his cheeks until he was the gray of a winter sky. His jaw slackened, and for a moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had built a throne out of thin air and finally felt the wind. What is this? A senior board member demanded, standing up and pointing at the screen. Michael? Debt acquisition? Pension fund diversions? What the hell is going on? Michael didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared at the screen, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrific recognition. He looked at the signature at the bottom of the document, not a name, but a stylized arc, the logo of Quantum Horizon. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just shocked by the financial ruin. He was beginning to realize that someone had seen through him. Someone had been inside his house, metaphorically and literally, and knew every crack in his soul. I leaned into my microphone, my voice a whisper that he would never hear, yet felt like it was being breathed directly into his ear. That's your status, Michael. Debt. Deception. And a wife you never knew was your master. On the screen, the room descended into chaos. Board members were shouting, phones were being pulled out, and the air of corporate masculinity had been replaced by the stench of panic. David Chin stood up quietly, tucked his laptop under his arm, and walked toward the exit. He caught the camera's lens for a split second and gave a microscopic nod. He was out. Michael remained frozen at the head of the table. He looked small. He looked fragile. He looked like the anchor he had always accused me of being. I turned off the screen. The command center returned to its quiet, blue stillness. I walked out of the room, through the pantry, and into the kitchen. I picked up the divorce papers Michael's lawyer had sent. I finally signed them. But I didn't use my married name. I signed with the bold, sweeping strokes of the woman who had just conquered a giant. I looked at the blue suit Michael had worn that morning. He would be coming home to a house that was no longer his, to a life that had been dismantled while he was busy bragging. The boardroom phantom had done her work. Now, it was time for the final act. The world doesn't end with a bang, it ends with a series of quiet, rhythmic clicks. In the command center, those clicks were the sound of automated cell orders being executed across 3 different time zones. I sat in the darkness, the blue light of the monitors carving deep shadows into my face, watching the digital pulse of Roberts Global. It wasn't a heart attack I was inducing, it was a slow, agonizing atrophy. A crash is too merciful, Elena, I said, my voice barely a whisper. A crash allows for a bailout. It allows for a narrative of market volatility. I want this to be personal. I want it to feel like the ground is simply dissolving beneath his feet, inch by agonizing inch. The algorithm is tuned to tremble mode, Sarah, Elena replied from the speakers. We're leaking small blocks of shares every 45 minutes. Just enough to trigger the sell signals in the high-frequency trading bots, but not enough to halt trading. It looks like a slow loss of confidence. A terminal leak. I leaned back, a cup of herbal tea cooling on the desk beside me. On the central screen, a news feed was muted. It showed a breaking news banner. Michael was standing in front of a bank of microphones at the New York Stock Exchange, looking every bit the defiant titan. He was wearing a different suit today, a charcoal gray power suit, but his expression was the same. The cocky smile was back, though it looked brittle, like glass that had been shattered and glued back together. I unmuted the feed. And let me be clear, Michael was saying, his voice projecting a fake, booming confidence. The document leaked during yesterday's meeting was a sophisticated piece of corporate sabotage by a competitor who fears our upcoming innovations. Roberts Global remains liquid, robust, and on the verge of a technological leap that will render our rivals obsolete. Our Aegis logistics AI is months ahead of anything in the market. I felt a cold, sharp laugh bubble up in my chest. Aegis. The AI that David Chin had written on a discarded laptop 3 years ago while Michael was busy golfing in Pebble Beach. Is the white paper ready? I asked. Ready and distributed to the top 12 tech analysts in the world, anonymously, Elena confirmed. We called it, the Stone Age of Aegis, a forensic deconstruction. I watched the screen as Michael continued to boast. At that exact moment, I saw several reporters in the front row look down at their tablets. The white paper I had released wasn't just a critique, it was a mathematical execution. It proved, using the very code Michael was currently bragging about, that his breakthrough was built on outdated architecture from 2018. It showed that Aegis couldn't handle the data loads of a modern city, let alone a global logistics network. It turned his diamond into a piece of charcoal in real time. On the screen, Michael's smile didn't just vanish, it curdled. A reporter stood up, shouting a question about the Alethea white paper that had just hit the wires. Michael's eyes went wide. He looked like a man who had walked out onto a stage only to realize the floorboards had been replaced by tissue paper. Watch the stock, Sarah, Elena said. I looked at the left monitor. The green line of Roberts Global gave a sudden, sharp shudder. It didn't plummet, it began to vibrate downward. 98.5, 97.2. 95.8, this was the financial erosion. Michael's personal wealth was tied almost entirely to his stock options. He had used those options as collateral for his lavish lifestyle, the $20 million penthouse, the collection of vintage Ferraris, the private jet memberships. He was rich on paper, but that paper was currently being shredded by the very algorithms I had spent 10 years perfecting. By 2 p.m., the phone calls started. Not to him, but to his creditors. I had triggered a clause in his primary loan agreement with the International Banking Consortium. Since I now owned 40% of his debt, I had the right to demand an immediate solvency review if the stock dropped below a certain threshold for more than 4 hours. Michael came home at 6 p.m. I was sitting in the living room, the lights dimmed, reading a book. He didn't see the command center, he saw the housewife. He slammed the door so hard the crystal in the cabinet rattled. Did you see it? He screamed, throwing his briefcase across the room. Did you see what they're doing to me? Some coward is leaking internal data. They're trying to destroy me, Sarah. I looked up, my expression one of calm, vacant concern. Oh, Michael. That sounds terrible. Is the company okay? The company is fine, he roared, though his hand was trembling as he reached for the decanter of scotch. It's just some technical glitch in the market. I'll fix it. I always fix it. The bank called the house today, I said softly, watching him freeze mid-pour. He turned, his face pale. Which bank? The consortium. Something about a margin call on the penthouse? I told them you were very busy with your Aegis thing and that you'd handle it. He dropped the decanter. The amber liquid splashed across the white rug, the rug I had spent 3 hours cleaning last week. He didn't even notice. He slumped into the sofa, the cocky titan reduced to a terrified boy. I need money, he whispered. Sarah, the house, it's in your name, isn't it? The trust? I felt a surge of something ancient and cold. For 10 years, he had treated this house as a trophy of his success, a place where I was the primary ornament. Now, he wanted to use it as a life raft for his vanity. The trust is protected, Michael, I said, my voice as smooth as a funeral shroud. I spoke to the lawyers. They said it would be unwise to leverage family assets for speculative corporate ventures. Especially now. He looked at me, and for the first time, he really looked at me. He saw the stillness. He saw that I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicked. I was just there. You've changed, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. You're different since that reunion. I haven't changed at all, Michael, I said, standing up and walking toward the kitchen. I'm just finally letting you see the woman who's been here the whole time. You just never cared to look past the apron. I went to the kitchen and began to peel a potato. The rhythmic sound of the blade against the skin was the only sound in the house. Behind the pantry wall, I knew the monitors were still glowing. I knew the tremble was becoming a landslide. I thought about the years I had spent, grocery shopping, the hours I spent in the car, heart pounding, while I negotiated with banks to prevent this very thing from happening to him. I had been his invisible shield. I had protected him from his own incompetence because I loved the man I thought he was. But that man was a ghost. And now, Michael Roberts was learning that when you dismiss the person holding up your world, you shouldn't be surprised when gravity finally takes hold. The financial erosion wasn't just about the money. It was about stripping away the layers of his ego until there was nothing left but the truth. He was fighting a phantom, a mysterious CEO, who knew his every move before he made it. He was fighting me. And he was losing everything. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted beans and the distant, mechanical hum of a city that never stops moving. I chose the Gilded Bean, a glass-walled corner cafe that sat in the literal shadow of Roberts Global's headquarters. I arrived early, wearing a charcoal wool coat over a simple silk blouse. I sat by the window, watching the pedestrians scurry like ants below the towering monolith Michael still believed he controlled. Michael arrived 10 minutes late, a calculated move designed to remind me that his time was worth more than my existence. He stepped out of a black town car, looking every bit the corporate conqueror. He was wearing a bespoke, $5,000 navy suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, his chin tilted at that familiar, arrogant angle. To the casual observer, he was a man at the height of his power. But I saw the truth. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his cufflinks. I saw the dark circles beneath his eyes that even the most expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. He was a man holding his breath, praying that the world wouldn't notice he was already underwater. He slid into the booth across from me, bringing with him the scent of expensive sandalwood and desperation. He didn't order coffee. He didn't ask how I was. He simply pulled a thick envelope from his leather briefcase and slapped it onto the marble tabletop. "Let's get this over with, Sarah," he said, his voice flat and weary. "I have a meeting with the creditors in an hour. This whole market fluctuation has everyone on edge. I don't have time for domestic drama." I looked at the envelope. "The divorce papers? Everything is there. The division of assets, the child support, which is more than generous, by the way, and the house." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're lucky I'm leaving you the house, Sarah. In this climate, I could have argued it was a corporate-linked asset. But I'm a fair man. I want you to have a roof over your head while you figure out what to do with the rest of your life." I felt a surge of cold, dark amusement. Fair. He was leaving me the house because he thought it was a consolation prize. He had no idea that the house was the only asset in his entire portfolio that was actually debt-free, solely because I had cleared the mortgage with my own dividends 3 years ago. "Sign them," he commanded, sliding a gold-plated fountain pen across the table. "I've already signed. Once you do, we're done. You can go back to your gardening and your book clubs, and I can focus on saving the industry." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, the final weight of a decade-long anchor. I looked at Michael. He was staring at his phone, his thumb flicking nervously through stock charts. He wasn't even looking at the woman who had spent 10 years as his ghostwriter, his strategist, and his shield. He was already looking past me, toward a future where he was the hero of his own story. I signed. I didn't hesitate. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to reconsider. I signed every page with the fluid, certain strokes of a woman who was finally reclaiming her name. "There," I said, sliding the papers back to him. "It's done." Michael grabbed the envelope, a look of immense relief washing over his face. The cocky smile I had lived with for years returned, a flash of predatory triumph. He stood up, smoothing the front of his expensive suit. "Good girl," he said, the patronizing tone so thick it made the coffee in my cup feel bitter. "I'll have my assistant send over the final copies. Try not to spend all the alimony in one place, Sarah. The world is a lot more expensive than you realize when you're not living under my protection." He turned to leave, the town car already idling at the curb. He walked with a swagger, the posture of a man who had just dealt with a minor inconvenience. He reached the door of the cafe, his hand on the handle, a winner in his own mind. Then, it happened. His phone emitted a sharp, distinctive chime, the high-priority alert he had set for the Global Tech Innovation Summit. It was the notification everyone in the industry had been waiting for, the reveal of the keynote speaker, the mysterious CEO of Quantum Horizon who would be appearing in person for the first time in history. I watched him through the glass. He stopped mid-stride. His shoulders tensed. He pulled the phone from his pocket, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screen. I knew exactly what he was reading. Breaking, the ghost revealed. Quantum Horizon Technologies confirms CEO Sarah Mitchell, formerly Roberts, will deliver the keynote at the Tech Innovation Summit. Mitchell to address the systematic underestimation of invisible power and announce the acquisition of Roberts' global debt. Michael froze. His hand dropped from the door handle. The envelope containing our divorce papers, the papers that gave me my freedom and left him with a crumbling empire, slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. I watched as the color drained from his neck, creeping up to his face until he was the gray of a dying ember. He didn't turn around immediately. He couldn't. He stood there, his back to me, his $5,000 suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Slowly, as if his neck were made of rusted iron, he turned around. He looked through the glass of the cafe, his eyes wide and bloodshot, searching for the housewife he had just dismissed. He found me. I was still sitting at the table, my hands folded calmly over my coat. I didn't look away. I didn't offer him a smile. I simply met his gaze with the cold, clear eyes of the person who had been his master all along. The cocky smile was gone. In its place was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He looked at the phone, then at me, then at the envelope on the floor. He tried to take a step toward the table, but his legs seemed to give way. He looked like a man who had just realized that the anchor he had cut loose was actually the only thing keeping his ship from the waterfall. I stood up. I didn't wait for him to speak. I walked toward the door, stepping over the envelope on my way out. As I passed him, the scent of his expensive cologne felt like a relic of a dead civilization. "You were right about one thing, Michael," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, yet loud enough to shatter whatever was left of his composure. He looked at me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. What? "The world is a lot more expensive than I realize," I said, looking him up and down. "But it turns out, I'm the one who owns the bank." I walked out into the crisp morning air. The town car was still there, the driver waiting to take Michael to a meeting that no longer mattered. I didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sound of a man finally realizing that the most dangerous person in his life wasn't the enemy he knew, it was the wife he never bothered to meet. The signature of doom hadn't just ended my marriage. It had officially begun his extinction. The air inside the Neotech arena was pressurized, humming with the collective anxiety and ambition of 10,000 industry titans. Blue laser lights crisscrossed the ceiling, carving the dark expanse into sharp, geometric patterns. This was the Vatican of Silicon Valley, the place where fortunes were anointed and legacies were incinerated. Backstage, the smell of ozone and expensive espresso was thick. I stood in the dimness of the wings, wearing a blazer of midnight navy so sharp it looked like it was cut from a shard of glass. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic thrum, the heartbeat of a machine. For 10 years, I had watched this summit from a television in a suburban kitchen, drying dishes while the world celebrated men like Michael. Today, the world would learn that the men were just the puppets. "He's on," Elena's voice whispered in my earpiece. "The auditorium is at capacity. Every major news network is streaming this live. Michael looks desperate, Sarah. He's trying to sell the Aegis dream one last time." I stepped closer to the heavy velvet curtain. On the massive stage, Michael was a small, frantic figure bathed in a harsh white spotlight. He looked like a man trying to hold back a tsunami with a plastic bucket. Behind him, the giant LED screens displayed a swirling, colorful animation of the Aegis network, an animation I knew was hollow, a beautiful skin covering a skeleton of broken code. "Innovation," Michael's voice boomed, though it lacked its usual resonance. It sounded thin, strained by the weight of the lies he had told since that morning in the coffee shop. "Innovation is not just about technology. It's about leadership. It's about the courage to see a future that others ignore. Roberts Global has weathered the recent market volatility because our foundation is built on a vision that is, quite frankly, unmatched." A few people in the front row whispered. The Alethea white paper from the day before had done its work. The room was full of sharks who smelled blood in the water. "We are currently in the final stages of a strategic alignment with a global partner," Michael continued, his sweat glistening under the lights. "A partner that recognizes the sheer, raw power of the Aegis protocol. By tomorrow, we will." It was time. I didn't wait for the moderator to introduce me. I didn't wait for the lights to shift. I simply stepped out from the wings and began the long walk toward the center of the stage. The sound of my heels against the stage floor was a series of rhythmic, metallic reports, click, click, click. It was a small sound, but in the silence of that arena, it sounded like a hammer against a nail. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Michael stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing as he saw a woman in a sharp blazer, her hair in a sleek, uncompromising bob, approaching his spotlight. He didn't recognize me at first. To him, I was just a silhouette, an intruder on his stage. "Excuse me," Michael stammered into the mic, a flash of his old cockiness returning. "This is a private keynote. Security, could we have this person escorted?" I reached the center of the stage, stopping exactly 3 feet from him. I turned to face the audience, my eyes scanning the sea of faces until I found the cameras. The silence in the room was now absolute, a vacuum of sound that made the air feel heavy. "The Aegis protocol is dead, Michael," I said. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't have to. The acoustic design of the arena carried my voice to the very last row, cold and crystalline. Michael flinched as if I had struck him. He peered through the glare of the lights, his face contorting as the realization finally, brutally hit home. "Sarah," he whispered, the name catching in his throat like a bone. What are you doing here? You need to leave. You don't belong here. This is business, not." "This is my business, Michael," I said, stepping into his spotlight, forcing him to retreat into the shadows. I gestured to the massive LED screen behind us. With a single tap on the tablet in my hand, the colorful Aegis animation vanished. It was replaced by a single, towering logo, the silver arc of Quantum Horizon. The audience gasped, a sound like a collective intake of breath before a plunge. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I addressed the 10,000 people in the room, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "For 10 years, the world has asked who the Ghost of the Valley is. Who designed the predictive algorithms that stabilized the 2024 crash? Who engineered the infrastructure for the European Tech Consortium?" I turned to look at Michael. He was trembling, his hands gripping the edges of the podium so hard the wood groaned. The cocky smile was long gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "For 10 years, I sat in the background," I continued. "I was the woman you saw at the reunions. The woman you dismissed as just a housewife. I allowed that narrative to exist because it gave me the most powerful tool in any industry, invisibility. While men like Michael Roberts were busy performing leadership for the cameras, I was busy building the world they were trying to sell." I looked back at the crowd. Today, Quantum Horizon has completed the acquisition of 85% of Roberts Global's outstanding debt. We are not here to merge. We are here to foreclose. The room erupted. It wasn't applause, it was the sound of a system breaking. Reporters were standing, flashes were going off like a barrage of artillery, and the board members of Roberts Global were already fleeing for the exits. Michael collapsed against the podium. "You did this," he hissed, his voice cracked and ugly. "You've been lying to me for 10 years. You stole my company." "I didn't steal it, Michael," I said, looking him in the eye for the last time. "I built it. You just happened to be standing in the lobby. I gave you every chance to be a partner. I gave you 10 years of my brilliance, and all you ever saw was a laundry list." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "You wanted a woman who matched your status, Michael. Look at the screens. Look at the markets. Look at the world. Tell me, do you think you've finally found her?" I didn't wait for his answer. I turned and walked off the stage, the silver arc of Quantum Horizon glowing behind me like a rising moon. I didn't need a microphone. My presence was the announcement. The housewife was gone. The architect had arrived. And the world would never look at a quiet room the same way again. The atmosphere in the Neotech arena didn't just change, it underwent a phase shift, turning from the heated gas of corporate hype into the freezing, pressurized liquid of a public execution. As I stood at the center of the stage, the bank of overhead floodlights caught the obsidian sheen of my blazer, making me appear less like a person and more like a silhouette carved out of the void. Michael was frozen. His fingers were still hooked into the edges of the mahogany podium, his knuckles white enough to pop through the skin. For a split second, the CEO mask tried to reassert itself, that twitch of the lip, that narrowing of the eyes that usually preceded a witty retort or a booming dismissal. But as he looked from my face to the towering Quantum Horizon logo behind me, the gears of his arrogance finally ground to a halt. "Sarah," he stammered, the name sounding small and fragile against the hum of the cooling fans. "What are you doing here? This is a restricted keynote. You need to get off the stage. You're embarrassing yourself. Go back to the hotel." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I waited until the camera drones swarmed closer, their red recording lights blinking like the eyes of hungry insects. I reached out and took the secondary microphone from its stand. The metal was cold, a grounded conductor for the electricity surging through my veins. 10 years ago, Michael, I began, my voice amplified to a godlike resonance that shook the floorboards beneath his feet. At a high school reunion, you stood in a room full of our peers and told them that I was just a housewife. You said it with a laugh that suggested I was a pleasant, static ornament in the background of your grand design. The audience was a sea of pale, upturned faces. I saw Greg Miller in the third row, the man who had pitted me at the reunion, his jaw literally hanging open. "While you were out, slaying dragons, as your friends put it," I continued, turning my head to look Michael dead in the eye, "I was the one forging the swords. Every strategic breakthrough Roberts Global claimed in the last decade didn't come from a boardroom. It came from the kitchen table. It came from the woman who folded your laundry while she was simultaneously architecting the most sophisticated predictive AI in the world." "That's a lie," Michael shouted, his voice cracking, a desperate, shrill sound. He turned to the audience, his hands gesturing wildly. "She's delusional. She's a disgruntled spouse trying to claw for relevance in a divorce." "Is that so?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, silken quiet. I tapped the tablet in my hand. The screen behind us shifted. It was no longer a logo. It was a live feed of the global debt markets. At 9:02 a.m. this morning, Quantum Horizon Technologies, my company, executed a buyback of the final block of Roberts Global's high-interest loans. Michael, you didn't just lose a merger. You lost your sovereignty. As of this moment, I am your primary creditor, your majority shareholder, and the owner of every patent currently filed under your name. I stepped closer, invading his personal space, the scent of his panicked sweat cutting through the ozone. I am the CEO of Quantum Horizon. I am the ghost you've been chasing for months. And I am the person who just officially rejected your merger proposal on the grounds of catastrophic leadership incompetence. The cocky smile Michael had worn like armor for 10 years didn't just fade. It shattered. The muscles in his face seemed to collapse inward, his features sagging as if the bone beneath had turned to ash. He looked at the screen, then back at me, his eyes wide and vacant, the lights reflecting in them like stars in a dead sea. He looked like a man who had looked into a mirror and realized he didn't have a reflection. "You," he whispered, his voice stripped of all its baritone authority. "You were the one. All this time. It was you." "It was always me, Michael," I said, my voice carrying to the back of the hall without the need for the mic. "You just never bothered to look at the person standing right in front of you." I reached into my blazer and pulled out the final legal blow, a physical copy of the foreclosure notice, wrapped in the same blue silk ribbon I used for the kids' birthday presents. I placed it on the podium, right over his shaking hands. "The board has already been notified," I said. "Your access to the Roberts Global servers was terminated 60 seconds ago. Security is waiting for you at the stage door to escort you from the building. You can keep the suit, Michael. Consider it a parting gift from the housewife." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a legacy turning to dust. Michael stood there, a hollowed-out shell of a man, while the world watched his extinction in high definition. I didn't wait for him to be led away. I turned back to the audience, my posture straight, my gaze fixed on the horizon. Now, I addressed the world. Shall we talk about the actual future of innovation? The applause didn't start as a roar. It started as a single, hesitant clap from David Chin in the wings, then spread like a wildfire until the very foundations of the arena trembled. I stood in the light, finally visible, while Michael Roberts disappeared into the shadows of the wings, a footnote in a story he thought he owned. The reveal was complete. The housewife was gone. And the world was finally, beautifully, paying attention. The roar of the crowd was a physical wave, but as I raised my hand, a vacuum of silence instantly reclaimed the arena. I didn't move from the center of the stage. I didn't need to. The gravity of the moment had shifted entirely toward me. Michael was gone, ushered into the shadows by two stone-faced security guards, leaving behind only the ghost of his perfume and a podium that now felt like a relic of a bypassed age. "What you just witnessed," I said, my voice dropping into a register of calm, clinical precision, was not a hostile takeover. It was an intervention. I turned to the towering LED wall behind me. With a flick of my wrist across the tablet, the Quantum Horizon logo dissolved. In its place appeared a complex, glowing web of interconnected nodes, a digital map of Roberts Global's entire corporate nervous system. "Let us perform the autopsy," I announced. The screen began to bleed red. I highlighted the Singapore acquisition, the Lumina project that Michael had touted as a masterstroke. "Here," I pointed, "is where arrogance met incompetence. $12 million a week in burn rate, hidden through a series of offshore shell companies that even your board didn't know existed." I swiped again, and a series of internal emails flashed briefly, messages from David Chin and other engineers warning of structural flaws, all met with Michael's dismissive, one-sentence replies: "Stick to the code, I'll handle the strategy." And here, I continued, my voice hardening, is the most damning evidence of all. The Aegis Protocol. A project Michael claimed was the future of logistics. In reality, it was a hollowed-out shell, a collection of legacy scripts stolen from open-source libraries and rebranded with a flashy UI to trick investors. It wasn't innovation, it was a magic trick performed by a man who forgot that eventually, the lights come on. In the VIP section of the audience, I saw the Roberts Global Board members. Their faces were no longer pale, they were translucent. Phones were out, thumbs flying across screens as they contacted their legal teams, realizing that their fiduciary negligence was being broadcast to the entire world. They weren't just losing money, they were losing their immunity. I paused, letting the weight of the data sink in. The stock ticker at the bottom of the screen was a blur of crimson. Roberts Global was in freefall, shedding billions in valuation every second. To the analysts in the room, it was a tragedy. To me, it was the clearing of a forest fire to make way for new growth. "But this autopsy isn't just about the failures of one man," I said, softening my tone as I looked toward the sections where the mid-level managers and engineers sat, the invisible workforce Michael had treated as furniture. "It's about the failure of a system that values the loud over the brilliant. A system that assumes a woman at a school run isn't also calculating the next shift in the global economy." I brought up a new slide. It wasn't a graph. It was a list of names, hundreds of them. David Chin's was at the top. "To the employees of Roberts Global," I said, "the man you worked for is gone. But the work you did matters. Quantum Horizon is not here to liquidate your talent. We are here to liberate it." Effective immediately, every engineer, analyst, and support staffer at Roberts Global is being offered a position within the Quantum Network. We are doubling your R&D budgets and removing the leadership that told you to ignore your own intelligence. The silence in the room broke, but not with a roar. It broke with a sob. I saw David Chin in the wings, his head in his hands, finally exhaling a breath he had been holding for years. Michael Roberts thought the ghost of the valley was a threat, I concluded, looking straight into the primary camera lens, speaking to every woman who had ever been talked over in a meeting or dismissed at a dinner party. He was wrong. I was his best-kept secret. I was the one who made his world make sense. And today, I've decided to stop making sense for him, and start making sense for the rest of us. As I walked off the stage, the stock of Robert's Global hit a terminal floor. Michael was a professional pariah, a cautionary tale that would be taught in business schools for decades. But as I stepped into the cool, quiet hallway backstage, I didn't feel the rush of victory. I felt the quiet, steady hum of a machine that was finally in alignment. Elena was waiting for me, her eyes shimmering. The world is calling, Sarah. Every major network. Every head of state. They all want to know, what's next? I looked at my reflection in the glass door, the sharp blazer, the steady eyes, the woman who was no longer hiding. What's next? I smiled. I think it's time we go home and check on the kids. They have a soccer game tomorrow, and I promised I'd bring the orange slices. The glass walls of the Quantum Horizon Global headquarters don't just provide a view of the city, they seem to hold the sky itself. High above the bustling streets where Robert's Global once stood as a monolithic shadow, this building breathes. It's an ecosystem of light, open spaces, and the quiet, frantic hum of people who aren't afraid to be brilliant. 5 years have passed since the night the world learned my name. 5 years since the housewife walked onto a stage and dismantled a dinosaur. I stand on the observation deck, a cup of tea in my hand, no longer the cold, forgotten dregs of a suburban morning, but a warm, jasmine-scented ritual of clarity. Beside me stands Sophie, my daughter. At 19, she carries the same steel in her gaze that took me 30 years to forge. She's wearing a tailored blazer, her laptop tucked under her arm, currently debating the ethics of Neuralink encryption with our head of R&D. The feedback from the Nairobi Innovation Hub is in, Mom, Sophie says, her thumb scrolling through a holographic data stream. The new predictive irrigation AI increased crop yields by 40%. The local women's collective is asking if we can scale the server capacity by next month. I look at her and see the new horizon personified. She doesn't have to hide her brilliance. She doesn't have to wait for a man to give her permission to speak. She grew up watching her mother run a global empire from a kitchen pantry, and she learned the most important lesson I ever had to teach: power is not a spotlight, it is the generator. Scale it, I say softly. And send Elena. I want a first-person audit of the social impact, not just the numbers. We aren't just building tech, Sophie. We're building autonomy. Michael is a footnote now. Sometimes, when I'm teaching a guest lecture at Harvard or Stanford, I see his name in the curriculum. He is the case study in corporate hubris, the cautionary tale of a leader who mistook visibility for value. Last I heard, he was trying to rebrand himself as a life coach in a different state, still chasing a ghost he never understood. I don't feel anger toward him anymore. Anger requires an investment of energy, and my portfolio is far too busy for that. I look down at the city. Below us, the Mitchell Foundation for Invisible Potential is hosting its annual gala. It's not a room full of suits and scotch. It's a room full of justs. Just a teacher. Just a nurse. Just a mother. We provide the capital, the mentorship, and the infrastructure for women whom the world has tried to categorize into silence. We fund the dreams that were born in the stolen moments of domestic life. Our latest venture, a venture capital fund specifically for re-entry professionals, has already birthed 3 unicorn startups. You're thinking about the reunion again, aren't you? Sophie asks, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Is it that obvious? You have that architect look in your eyes, she teases. The one that says you're about to redesign the entire board. I laugh, a sound that is now full and free. I was just thinking about those 6 words, Sophie. She's just a housewife. They used to feel like a cage. Now, I realized they were my greatest strategic advantage. They were the camouflage that allowed me to build a world that would eventually replace theirs. The sun begins to set, casting a deep, amber glow over the headquarters. The lights in the lab below begin to flicker on, 1,000 small, steady fires of innovation. The game hasn't just been won, it has been completely, irrevocably redesigned. The old hierarchies of status and loudness have been replaced by a network of quiet, decentralized brilliance. I reach out and squeeze Sophie's hand. She is the junior partner of a firm that owns the future, but more importantly, she is a woman who knows her own worth. Come on, I say, turning back toward the glass doors of the boardroom. The board is waiting. We have a world to finish rebuilding. As we walk into the light of the office, the housewife is nowhere to be found. There is only the architect, her successor, and a horizon that finally looks like it belongs to everyone. I am truly humbled that you chose to spend your precious time with me today. This story is a tribute to every woman who has ever felt invisible or underestimated. If this journey touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Queen's Revenge to join our community of strength. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever turned someone's doubt into your greatest power? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be the exact motivation someone else needs to hear today.